If I were a black father and I was concerned about the safety of my child, I would say be very respectful to police. I'd also say be very careful of those kids in the neighborhood and don't get involved with them, because, son, there's a 99% chance they're going to kill you, not the police. When you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist.
Well, I think their
Black lives matter, white lives matter, Asian lives matter, Hispanic lives matter. That's anti-American and it's racist.
That, of course, Rudy Giuliani here, and he's really touching a flashpoint about how tense race relations are right now. No doubt about it. The Times, well, they're comparing today, going back to the 60s, saying in part, police officers and sociologists alike say that racial tension is approaching a point last seen during the street riots that swept urban America in the late 60s, when disturbances erupted in places like neighborhoods in Watts, Detroit, Newark during summers of deep discontent. So the question is, are we looking at a tipping point? And Don, I'm going to first start with a guy that you notably sparred with for many years at Gracie Mansion City Hall, that being Rudy Giuliani.
Every day.
I know that's Rudy being Rudy, but did he go too far?
Way too far. This is not the time for Rudy's posturing. Rudy's day, Mayor Giuliani's day, has come and gone. It's time for him to go sit down and retire and enjoy his wife and his kids and whatever. He does make a point about black-on-black crime. That is an effective point.
And in fact, he stepped back to 99% to say 90%, but still, yeah.
Right, but the black community does not need to be lectured by the likes of a Rudy Giuliani. I watched him on television last week, and he was saying how, oh, you know, Amadou Diallo, I faced protests for months, and then it went to a jury, and the jury had 4 blacks, and they ruled the police officers not guilty. He conveniently forgot to mention that it was a change of venue from the Bronx all the way up to Albany. He's not helping the situation. I think what we're hearing from both of these professionals right now, and I know surely from Pastor, as well as NYPD retired, is that we've got to take a step back, and every party involved has to reassess. Rudy right now is serving as a lightning rod, because the kids in the hood, they see that, and that alone can spark the next confrontation.
You know, Andrew, of all places last week, I was in Montana, okay? And Montana, yeah, exactly. A little different than Newark and Watts. But anyway, so, and surprisingly, I actually shut up, but I listened to some of the, it's, first off, it was stunning how everybody, from whatever place they came from, felt the tension in this country, and how, like, a forest fire can start by just a little, somebody by accident backfiring the car or whatever. The fear, the palpable concern about how quickly this thing could go. I thought it was, they were exaggerating the point, but the more and more I spoke to people, the more they believed it. You?
Oh, well, I would.
Did you agree with that analogy that it's like the 60s?
I don't think we're remotely there yet. I think there were assassinations in the 60s that divided the country. There was the Vietnam War that was dividing the country. We have some internal conflicts right now, but we're not anywhere near where we were in the 60s, and you know, knock on wood, we don't get anywhere there. Look, I'm not surprised that the story reverberated in Montana, where, you know, the #1 minority group is Native American. There are very few black folks in Montana. I lived there for a year and a half. But while the story out of Baton Rouge or the killing in St. Paul might not register in Montana, the killing of the police officers does, because every community has police officers, and because, as we talked about on the show last week, they're the first line of defense, and it hits home when they wind up as targets. And so it's relatable, and I can see how this scares white America, in addition to scaring the rest of the country. And the only reason I single out white America is because of the impact that has on our politics, which I know we'll get into a little bit later.
Another thing that struck some was, how could they be protesting 24 hours after 5 cops were killed? Did you have a problem? Was there a too soon to the rallies?
I had an issue with it. I did. I mean, you know, we had a tragic event happen in Dallas. 5 officers, like you said, in Montana. People are feeling it. You know, they should have taken some more time off, and everybody should kind of step back and say, let's cool this off a little bit. 24 hours later is not cooling it off, you know, and that's on both sides, you know. They could have said, you know what, we're going to respect this. We're still going to get our point across, but respect for the officers and try to bring this violence down to a low level, non-existent. We're going to postpone our march for another date.
I'm curious, Pastor, did you have any in the congregation who rallied and protested? And if so, how did they make the correlation where what we saw in Dallas and what we saw in other flashpoints, that one has nothing to do with the other when they felt so commingled?
So the answer is I do, and I did. And I have those in the congregation who were there in the 60s protesting. And you draw that line and you follow the path. The fight for humanity, the fight for human rights and civil rights is ongoing. That has not ended in our country. The war between law enforcement and the African American community, that's something that we're looking at now. And so I said all that to say that there are members in the community, members in the congregations that are angry, extremely angry. There are members of the clergy.
Say why. Because they've been angry for a long time, but why is it so raw now where 5 years ago it didn't seem as raw?
This is one of the things that I think, first I'll say the reason why the marches happen so quickly is because there's a disconnect. If I can feel your pain and your suffering, I'm going to be mindful of that in my decision making. If I don't feel your pain or your pain doesn't register with me, all I'm going to focus in on is my pain and my goal. And so I think it's evidence of a disconnect. The other aspect of the anger is because it's like watching the same thing over and over. There wasn't a connection
to guys killed in cold blood?
I can't say that there isn't a connection. I'm saying that there's a disconnection from that. And so what may seem reasonable in a connected environment is not in a disconnected environment. And so I'm going to go forward with my agenda. It doesn't mean necessarily that I don't weep for that loss, but that loss is not greater than the loss I feel personally.
Pastor's 1,000% correct. In the black community, we all weep for those police officers that lost their lives. But at the same time, the black community is basically saying, look, you have been killing us for decades and lying about it, meaning the police, and getting away with it. And so there is that disconnect. You weep with the police in Dallas, but they still see the video. And you said, what's the difference between now and 5 years ago? As Pastor said, YouTube. Now you can actually, you don't have to read in the Daily News, the Post, the Times, the police version of what happened, in which in black America you're interpreting what's true and what's not true. Now you can make your own formed opinion. It may be only a snapshot, but you can see yourself. And what we saw in those two videos were two black people that were executed, period.
It's not hard to imagine people who were in those protests thinking, you know what, we go through Dallas every day, or every couple of days.
You know, I can just imagine you sitting here. You spent your career doing this, right? Without guessing, you probably got family, right? Mm-hmm. And you're hearing rational guys saying, us and them, in effect. I can only imagine it's even getting worse, not better, in terms of cops looking at this saying, are you kidding me? You know, I'm going to go do some vertical, you know, patrol in some tenement, right? And who knows what's on the other end of it, you know? You can palpably see right now, if we're not careful, where this goes, right?
You can see that. But I had a conversation with some former NYPD people today, and a lot of police officers look at their job as a moral obligation. So even though we may sit here and go, I'm not going to do, you know, the police officers aren't going to do anything tonight when they go to work. They're just going to sit back. These police officers will take action when needed. They may be careful. They may be backing each other up more. But when the public calls 911, someone's getting robbed, raped, their home is getting burglarized, they will be there and they will take action. And they'll deal with the aftermath afterwards, but when it comes to doing their job, they're morally obligated to do it. Will you have some officers that will use this as an excuse, you know, just to do nothing? In any profession, you have people that
But also
just do
more
the bare
look at
minimum.
it, I guess the better way to say it is us and them.
Right, but the us and them mentality is there, but when it comes to actually doing their job, they're going to do it.
One quick thing, this afternoon, right before I came on air, Joe Biden being interviewed, and he said, you know, one of the big things that's changed is funding for police, for community policing was cut, and there's been a tangible impact, not on the national crime rate, but on the presence in certain communities about police who actually know somebody's name. Is that a convenient excuse, or do you think it's real?
I think it's legitimate. I came on the police department in 1987, prior to community policing being introduced. And then I had to go through the CompStat period with Giuliani and go through that. But community policing makes a difference. When you have an officer in the community that people know who he is, when they have a problem, they can go to him. The community police are more connected. When that disappeared, they had nobody to go to. And then couple that with, we spoke about last week about how CompStat pushed these officers for numbers to go out there and have these interactions that they shouldn't have been having, or more than they should have, because police are going to have interactions with the community. It was a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Yep.
I think community policing, extremely important. I don't think Biden understated it. I agree on 100%.
All right, coming up next, now the race about race. The state of race relations becoming a big issue for presidential candidates, and they're also far apart on that issue as well. Plus, what should the president say or not say tomorrow when he addresses the nation?